Okay, so this is General Biology, Bio 131, and we're doing Chapter 9. Remember, Chapter 8, we started a group of chapters discussing the biodiversity. And we started with, generally speaking, about the eukaryotes versus the prokaryotes, what's the difference between those two, and also what are the domains in each one of those. And we started to talk about, and we actually talked about the prokaryotes, including the archaea and the bacteria. In this chapter, we are going to discuss the eukaryotes now. Chapter 9. This is biodiversity 2. Biodiversity 1 was, generally speaking, eukaryotes versus prokaryotes, and we talked about prokaryotes. So biodiversity 2, this is the eukaryotes, including fungi and plants, and then biodiversity 3, and this will be chapter 10, we will be talking about the last one of the eukaryotes, which is the animals. So biodiversity 2, which is the fungi and plants, which is the first two uh, of um, of the eukaryotes. Actually, we talked about the protist already, but we're talking about the main three eukaryotes, aside from the protist that we talked about in chapter 8. So now we're talking about fungi, plants, and then next chapter will be animals, and this will be together the eukaryotes. So we will be talking about different things, including fungi, uh, with some information about the fungi, and then we will talk about the plants. So fungi, including structure and reproduction, and then the plants, how they adapted from the most primitive form and how they evolved to more complex types of plants until the plants that we have nowadays. And we will take it one by one. Um, so this is just generally speaking, what do you call the scientist who is studying or specialized in each one of those microorganisms, fungi, plants, algae, and fossils? This is just an introduction. So the scientist or the person who is specialized in microorganisms is called microbiologist. For fungi, it's called mycologist. So remember, myco is a prefix that means fungus. Myco, fungus. Microbiologist, microbes, which is a or microorganisms. Myco means fungus, so this is studying the fungi. Plants is called botany. So botanist is the scientist who's specialized in plants. Uh, and then we have the algae and fossils. Algae, we call it phycologist, phycologist. And for the fossils, it's called paleontologist. This is the scientist for the fossils. This is just an introduction. But now we start with the fungi and then we will do the plants. Fungi before the plants, obviously, they have been here for billions of years, and there are so many types, more than 1,000 types. And generally speaking, the fungi, they work on dead organisms, um, and they decompose it. Decompose. I talked about it before. Decompose, like composition. When you put things together, you compose them. When you break it down, you decompose. So they decompose dead organisms. Whatever the organisms are, they can break it down. So they break down when they survive on something that's dead. They start an organism that's dead. They start to get the large molecules and break it down, decomposing it. And when they decompose it, they end up making small, producing small molecules, and they feed on these small molecules. But these small molecules would be available for other organisms to use that we will see later on. But obviously, they do that for themselves, but they can benefit other organisms. And fungi can be helpful and can be harmful. Generally speaking, most of the fungi are not harmful, and some of them are actually helpful. Like penicillin, that we all know, the antibiotic, is coming from the penicillium mold, and this is a fungus. The bread, the way they do the bread, in the way that we see it, is coming from the yeast. I think we know what's a yeast that we can get from the supermarket or something. They decompose a little bit and they produce some gas, and they give the bread and cake and other things their fluffy and their consistency. Some of them are food, for example. We can use some of them as food. Um, and as you see here, and some of them are bad for our food, and some for bad for our bodies, for our body. Uh, like this bread mold, it spoils food. When you see this mold on the bread, the food is bad. And for your information, if you look at this picture here, you would say, okay, this part right here, this contains the mold. So this part is bad. Let me cut it off. No, this is heavily concentrated with mold. It doesn't mean the other parts of the bread does not have any. You cannot see it that obvious unless it is really heavily clustered, but it can be anywhere else. So if that's the case, you get rid of the whole bread and don't even feed it to animals or something. Um, the one that's harmful to us is most of the time is the one that infect the skin. Like in this case, the athlete's foot, and the athlete's foot, which is known as tinea. This is a fungal disease. It's coming from fungus, and the reason why it infect usually it infect this part specifically, and why do you call it athlete's foot, even though this is what you need to know, but just for your information, if you are interested to know why they infect this part specifically and why athletes, because the fungi tend to thrive and tend to replicate and reproduce when there is more moist. So if this area and enclosed areas, so if they contain a lot of moist, which is obviously athletes, they can play the whole day long, and there is moist in there, and it's closed. They are we they didn't they don't take off their shoes for hours. So this is a perfect medium for this to invade the skin. And fungus for humans is very weak. I talked about this in the previous chapter. They barely just infect the skin. This is what they can do. But if they go inside of the body, we usually get rid of them. So they are weak, except if you have another issue. And I talked about this in AIDS in the previous chapter. So this is for fungi. Now the plants. Uh, the plants have it's another domain from the eukaryotes. We talked about fungi, and now the plants. We have a lot to talk about in the plants. And obviously, the last one will be animals, and this will be discussed in chapter 10. But we talked about the fungus in this chapter. Now we're talking about the plants, and this will be number 2 in the major 3 of the eukaryotes, aside from the protist that we talked about before. So we talked about the protist. Now we're talking about the other 3. 2 of them in this chapter, and the third one in the next chapter. So we talked about the fungi. Now there are things that are unique about plants that we will understand, including something that's like chloroplast, for example. Chloroplasts that do photosynthesis. This is obviously not something in animals. Um, and there are other things, something like the food drop, or the nutrients drop, or the nutrients vacuole. The plants have this characteristic of having vacuoles or spherical structures in which they store food, which is something unique for plants, and we will discuss the details. So the plants did a lot of adaptations with over millions of years, from the simplest form to more complicated, until it reached what we see today. And they started about 500 million years ago, like half a billion. This is where the plants started to evolve, adapt to survive in the dry lands, meaning there was algae before that. Algae obviously is more simple, and so the plants evolved from algae. And algae, they live mainly in the water. So in the water is all around all the time. But how did they move to the land, to the dry land? They have to do some adaptations, which is what happened actually. They adapted in order to move into the dry land out of the water. So started in the water, algae, and then when they started to go to the dry land, they have to do some adaptation in order. This is not, they are not in the water anymore. So the whole thing is in the water. The water surrounding them all the time. So this is how they survive, these types of algae. Uh, the green algae that we talked about before. We talked about algae before. And so how did they evolve to plants? You have to move from the water to the dry lands, but they don't have that capabilities because they live in the water. Now, when you go to dry land, how they can survive there? They have to develop like a root and system and so on, uh, step after step, until they were able to become the terrestrial eukaryotes that we see. Terrestrials means on the land, on the dry land. So the plants are multicellular, obviously. Did you ever see a plant that's unicellular, like one cell, and we still call it a plant? Of course not. It's a multicellular eukaryote. And they do photosynthesis. Does only plants do photosynthesis? No, remember we talked about other organisms that can do photosynthesis, and as long as you have the chloroplast. So if you talk about the plants, when they started to evolve and survive on land, they have to do this. They have to evolve and become two parts. Instead of the whole thing in the water, they started to become two parts. The shoot system, which is this part that you can see, uh, this is the part that's exposed. So exposed to what? Exposed to light and air, light and air, light including the sunlight, from which they will take the energy, and air, from which they can take the carbon dioxide. And then they started to make this other part, to develop the roots, because remember, the ancestors used to be in the water, so they don't need roots. It's surrounded. But now that it's in a dry land, you have to make roots, and the roots extend down in order to get the water that you need. It's not surrounding you anymore. It's a dry land. So you have to extend roots to get you the water. Not just the water, they also need minerals that the algae and the ancestors used to take from the surrounding water. Now you are in dry lands. How can you get the water? How can you get the minerals? You need both of those. Besides light and air. Light and air, this is the shoot system. Water and minerals, this is the root system, which is anchored inside the dry land in order to get the water and the minerals, not just the water and minerals. And that's explained if you are interested in plants, and if you're planting something in your backyard or something, you will see some of the plants flourishing and doing really good, and some others are not doing good. It's not just because of the type of the plant or is it healthy or not, it's the land itself. The land can contain minerals and other parts cannot, it does not contain, and you can add something like if you heard about Miracle Grow and that stuff, what is this? This is just adding the minerals that these plants need. So you're enriching the land. Um, then, if we're talking about the shoot part of the shoot will be this part which is within the flower part. And this is usually two parts, the pollens, and the pollens are simply like the sperms, the male cells. Um, they move either from one plant to the other plant or from one spot of the plant, one flower, to another flower in the same plant. And the other part is like the eggs, which is like the female reproductive organ. Um, believe it or not, it's kind of close to what you see in humans and animals. It's actually male cells and female reproductive system. We don't think about it this way, but this is what's actually happening within this flower here, deeper inside. There is a whole reproductive organ, not just the eggs. The eggs are inside the reproductive organ. Just like the eggs in humans, it's inside the female bodies. And then the sperms goes in and fertilize the egg inside the female's body. It will make a zygote and a fetus and so on. This is exactly the same thing, but in the plants. So here you have the female reproductive organ deep inside. You don't see it from this picture. It's deep inside and the eggs are ready at the top, like somewhere around here. And then when the pollens come, they are going to meet the eggs on top here, and they will go inside the reproductive system until fertilization occur, and then they become uh, uh, something similar to the zygote in males, which is the union of sperm and egg, and they develop into something. And believe it or not, the fruits that you eat, you're eating the female reproductive system that contain fertilized egg. Well, after they become like a zygote and after they grow up. Um, so pollens is similar to the sperms, and the pollens that you see uh, sometimes, and they cause some allergy. This is just this. It's a structure that contains the sperm inside. It's protected. It's protected, not just not just like the sperms, something similar to the sperms that's just flying. It's protected within something to protect it, and it can until it move from one to one. Either the wind can move it, the animals can move it, um, flies can move it, birds can move it, anything can move it, including even the bees. As you know, you see the bees coming from this flower to the next flower. While doing that, of course, they do not do that for the plant. They're doing that for themselves. They go to the flower because it smells good and contain nutrients that they can take and produce honey. But as they are doing that, some pollens will be trapped in their legs, and when they move to the next one, these pollens, which is the sperms, will detach from their legs and go to the egg in the reproductive organ, fertilizing it. Um, so this is how it works. This is very advanced form of the plants. We will discuss the less advanced, and we discussed how they evolved. But this is the structure of what we have now, including the shoot system and the root system. This is the shoot system, including the flower, and we will talk about the leaves and other parts. But this is the flowers, including the female organ inside, including the eggs exposed, and the pollens that can come to it. By the way, for your information, again, this is not something that you have to know, just if you're interested to know, those plants that have both pollens and eggs in the same plant. You have just one plant, and it produces fruits, for example. And you can buy a fruit tree and it doesn't produce anything. And you're wondering, like, what is this? What's happening here? It is what is this? The ones that you buy from the stores and you plant it in your backyard and you're waiting for the fruits to come, you can buy one if it is self-pollinated. It should be called self-pollinated. It should say um, on a sticker or something self-pollinated, meaning this one tree, they produce both pollens and eggs, and they have the reproductive organ. All of them have the reproductive organ, but the problem is how the sperms get in there. They produce both. It just move from one flower to the next, from this flower to the next. So they move from flower to flower, self-pollinating. There are other types. You can get a fruit tree and you leave it and it grow and everything for 5 years, nothing happened. Why? This is called cross-pollinated. It's not self-pollinated, meaning this one plant cannot fertilize itself, cannot pollinate itself, contain the female reproductive system, they contain the eggs, no pollens. So you have to put another one so the pollen of this go to this and vice versa. So they pollinate each other. This is called cross-pollination. Point I'm trying to make here is um, pollens need to fertilize the egg, sperms in the pollens need to fertilize the egg in the reproductive system in order to produce whatever the plant is producing. The rest of the shoot system will include the leaves, structure of the leaves. Leaves have vascular system, just like your vessels, like veins and arteries. They have something that's very similar to that, and we will discuss it. Because remember what? The algae, the ancestor of the plants that used to live in the water is all around. So everything is around you and everything can get what they need and get rid of what they don't need. Everything is easy. But now you have the roots here and you have the shoot up there. So how can you like transfer things from the top to the bottom, from the bottom to the top? And this is when they started to evolve into and make that vascular system. So vessels will take stuff from the roots going up all the way. And what if you see, and if you have like a very tall tree and the roots deep in there, they get the water and they get the minerals. And you need from the leaves, you need the rest, which is the sunlight, photosynthesis to get the energy. You also need carbon dioxide. So when you have the carbon dioxide, you have the water, you have the mineral, and the sunlight, that's it. This is how you make the sugar which feed the plant itself. And they will store the extras, and this is what we eat. They're extras. But how the plants itself feed itself? Well, each part alone cannot do the work. Like the leaves, they can get the sunlight, so they're getting you the energy that you need, and they get the carbon dioxide from the air. Okay, that's good. Not enough. The roots get the water and they get the minerals. So both of them need to come together, right? Water and minerals plus carbon dioxide. Add to that the energy coming from sunlight, you mix that together and you make sugar, whatever the type of sugar is. So how can you do that? Here it is. You need to move the water and minerals from the roots going up. And you need to move going up toward the leaves and they will produce the sugar. And then the sugar need to move down to go to the roots, feeding the roots and feeding the different parts. You have to move in two different directions, just like the arteries and veins in us. We have the artery that go from the heart to the different parts of the body to distribute the nutrients. And you have the veins from the different parts back to the heart. So you have to move from the heart to the rest of the body, from the rest of the body to the heart, going back and forth, arteries and veins. We have something similar to that, which is the phloem and the xylem. We will talk about it. Phloem and xylem is like arteries and veins. We will talk about this. But another thing related to the evolution of the plants is formation of this cuticle. like the ancestor was in the water. So you're not afraid, they are not afraid of losing the water. They are in the water. But now you are in a dry land. You barely getting some water in order to use it and feed yourself. So you need to keep that water. So this is where the cuticle evolved, which is a waxy coat, and this coat is covering the leaves in order to keep the water and prevent water loss. Otherwise, you get the water from the roots, it goes up, evaporates, you will die. So they develop that cuticle. The leaves itself, this is where the photosynthesis occur, and photosynthesis is formation of nutrients using sunlight, most importantly. But details are carbon dioxide, water, minerals. Carbon dioxide, water, minerals, plus sunlight. But what's your source of energy? Sunlight. This is where the name photosynthesis. And this is how you synthesize or you make sugar using photo, meaning light. Photo means light. So sunlight meaning. So this is what happened in the leaves. Is that it? Like they just take the sunlight? No, the other thing is they have pores, and these pores allow carbon dioxide to go in. So carbon dioxide move through the pores within the leaves, goes in. The leaves contain chloroplast, it's green. They absorb sunlight. So the leaves did their job. They got those two. The roots are doing the other parts, providing the water and providing the minerals. All of those will come together to make the sugar, feeding the plants survive, the plant grow. Plus, they have additional amount of sugar that they will make fruits and vegetables and all that. This is for them, they are storing the extras. For us, this is ours. This is what we're going to eat. But they are not doing that for that reason. They are doing that just to store and reproduce. They are doing that for themselves, but we use it. So this is for the leaves. On the other thing in the leaves is the lignin. Lignin is a chemical in the in their cell wall to make it tough. This is something obviously unique for the plants. We don't need tough walls in animal. Actually, animals and humans, they don't even have a cell wall. They have cell membrane. But these are chemicals unique to the plants. One of the things that are unique, lignin, and this is to make them soft. So that's why you see the leaves are like this. They are not like this. When they are doing like this, it means it's weak. There is something wrong happening. Now, since we talked about the fungi and we talked about the plants, there is something here, association between those two, which is called the mycorrhizae. Mycorrhizae. And the mycorrhizae, myco is a prefix that means fungus. Rhizae means root. So mycorrhizae is root fungus, a fungus that's associated with the roots of the plants. And this relationship here is not a bad relationship. Relationship can be uh, uh, both sides are benefiting each other, and we call that symbiotic. It can be one side or one organism is benefiting from the other one, not an exchange, just one side is benefiting. We call that parasite. So in this case, it's symbiotic, not parasite, because they are both are helping each other. So what kind of help does these fungi give to the roots, and what kind of help that the roots give to the fungi in this mycorrhizae? As you see here in the picture, these are the roots and these are the fungi. And the fungi are going to get, remember what the roots are looking for. What's the function of the roots? Water and minerals. So the fungi can provide these roots with water and mineral, specifically minerals. They can take the minerals from the soil and they live on them on the roots or beside the roots. So they give part of the minerals that they got from the soil surrounding them, they give it to the roots. So this is the benefit of the fungus to the roots. The roots will take the minerals from the fungi. The fungi get it from the soil and give it to the roots. How about the roots? What they are going to benefit or help the fungi? They give them some of their sugar. Remember, I told you the plants, they're all what they're doing is trying to make sugar, and they store it in the form of fruits or anything else, not just sugar and other things, but this is the main thing. So they give them some of the sugars. The fungi take some of the sugars, and they survive, and they get water and minerals from the soil. And since they are on the roots, they give it to the roots. The roots take it. So this is a symbiotic, like mutual type of benefiting each other. It's called symbiotic. Now the plants. The plants, as I mentioned before, they came from the ancestor. Remember that 500 million years ago, there was just algae. There was no plants or animals. They evolved. Um, I mean, in the land, in the dry land, there was no, not existed. They moved to the land. Um, so how did that happen? How did they evolve? They evolve uh, 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 step after step after step, or stage after stage after stage. So they started with something called the bryophytes. Biro is translation is mass. This type of very primitive plants or liverworts, very simple, very uncomplicated, very primitive types of plants. So biro means mass or liverworts. Phytes means plant. So bryophytes, these are the plants, type of plants, very primitive. That they call it the mass plants, bryophytes, and this is very primitive. And why very primitive? Because this is not when they started the vascular system that I talked about, and they did not produce seeds. This is more advanced. So no seeds, no vascular system, bryophytes, the very primitive ones. Not yet. This is just from the algae. From the algae, and they just moved to the land. Not yet. They didn't start producing the vascular system and seeds. And then the next plant is seedless vascular plants. This is where they start to become root and shoot. So if that's the case, you have to have vascular system. In order to move, you have roots now. And the shoot is up there, away. So you have to move, as I mentioned before, going up, going down. You have to have that vascular system, but it's not advanced enough to have seeds. The seeds are more advanced. And then they become, they advanced more and evolved more, and they made this gymnosperms. And gemo or gemno means naked. And then they become the angiosperms, and the angiosperms are the advanced ones. By the way, angio is a prefix that means vessels, and we will discuss that more when we talk about human body. Angio mean vessels. What do you mean vessels? Vessels is anything that carry blood in humans, and here it is any tubes that carry something, whatever it is, water, nutrients, whatever it is. So angio means vessels, and they are also seeded. So bryophytes, this is a very primitive, and no seeds. It's seedless, non-vascular. No seeds, no vessels. Next, vessels, seedless but vascular. Then gymnosperms until they produced the seeds ones, which is the one that contain vessels and seeds. Um, there is still this type of algae, which is called the charophytes. Charophytes is coming from carbon. Char mean carbon, like coming from charcoal. Carbon. Charcoal is a source of carbon. So charophytes, these are algae that very similar. If you wanted to know like what was the ancestor, what does the ancestor of the plants look like before the very first one, which is the bryophytes. Before that, charophytes, like this looks like the ancestors, the algae that later on become more advanced and evolved to become the bryophytes, and bryophytes become seedless vascular, and then gymnosperms, and then angiosperms. Angio is the one that contain the seeds, angio seeds. So if we talk about the plants now, how they evolved and adapted, there was this ancestor green algae. Green because they have chloroplasts, they do photosynthesis, but they are in the water. How they are going to become land plants, the plants that we know now. This happened that these green algae in the water about 475 million years ago, uh, they started to become the bryophytes and started to make the vascular system about 425 million years ago. And then at the end, they make the seeds. It's the system that we, or the steps that we talked about. This is how many years did it take to go to the land first, and then make the vascular system, and make the seeds at the end, which is the most recent one. The most recent is like 360 million years ago, but this is the last one. Um, so this cuticle that we talked about, which is the waxy outer layer, they evolved in order, you move this algae to the land. They started to make roots and shoots and so on. They started to live in the land, the bryophytes first, and there was no vascular system, but now you're not in the water anymore. So you need, this is the very first step. You need to, the water that you can get, you need to keep it. You're not in the water anymore. You're in a dry land. So this is one of the first things that started to evolve, which is this cuticle or the waxy outer layer, in order to reduce water loss and keep the water that you got for yourselves. You're not in the water anymore. And then the next step is vascular system. The bryophytes start to become longer. There is root here and shoot here. So it started to become longer. How can you move up and down? You have to produce the vascular system. This is the next step, producing the vascular system. And that's how the plants get taller and taller and taller. So the very first one is algae in the dry land, bryophytes, just in the land. And then in order to survive, they make the cuticle. And then they started to grow longer, evolving. In order to do that, you have to have the vascular system in order to move up and down, because the parts are not all in one spot. They are away from each other. So the vascular system is the second part that evolved. And then the next is when they started to make seeds. The gymnosperms, which is one of the steps, you can see here, gymnosperms. This is the difference between gymnosperms and angiosperms. The gymnosperms are the ones, even though it's in a dry land, but right beside the water. Now you need to move away from the water. And that's how you go to the next step, which is evolution of the seeds. The plants is not right beside the water anymore. They are moving away. So this is where the seeds are needed. And now the gymnosperms that used to live beside the water, they don't need to live beside the water anymore. The seeds can fly and go to another spot and make another plant. The last one to evolve are the flowers. And this is how they dominated the land and spread all everywhere because of these flowers. And the flowers will contain these eggs, and they also produce the pollens containing the sperms, and they can fly from one, and they can fly with the air to a distant part, uh, can go half a mile away, and then move from there to another spot, moving from one to one to one to one until they dominated the lands. And there are different ways for them to move. I talked about it. Maybe an animal that come in touch with the pollens, and then in touch with the eggs, and it can be birds, it can be bees, can be anything else, and it can just be just the wind. Like the very famous example, or the example that we should all know, is that dandelion, yellow flowers that grow in it's weeds that grow in the grass, and we get rid of it. Some at certain point of time, you see them producing this, like looks like cotton shaped, and they started to fly, and you see it. What's flying is actually the pollens, which contain the sperm inside. So if you pick one of those, it produced this fluffy part, white part, in order to be easy to move with the wind. But if you look at it, they will contain something that's very tiny, brown. This is actually the pollens containing the sperms inside, and they go land in another spot. So they move from your backyard to the neighbor's backyard and so on. Okay, so mosses, this is that one of the first plants to colonize land? Obviously, yes, we just talked about it. This is the bryophytes, the very first one. Bryo means mosses. Um, and there are thousands of mosses, obviously, yes. The mosses can live in any temperature, just anything above zero, because they are very primitive, just they live beside the water. So bryophytes that we talked about is seedless and non-vascular, and contain this waxy layer, because remember, this is the very first evolution that happened. You're not in the water anymore. Once you get the water, you need to keep it. This is the first thing that's produced. And they also produced some structures to keep the gametes and later on the embryo inside. This is the first thing. But they are primitive. They didn't develop the vascular system yet. Very primitive, just like this. They live right beside the origin of this was the algae, the green algae. So this is very primitive right here. If you look at it, there will be no vascular system. They don't need it. There are no seeds, and just they take the water. They side beside the water, so they don't need the vascular system, and they don't even become taller. It's just a spread like this. Um, so we still have bryophytes right now. But if you go like beside the water, you see this type of primitive plants. These are the bryophytes. Um, the bryophytes, the alternate generations. They have two forms. One of them is the spores, and the other one is gametophytes. The spores are produced by cells that are called sporophyte cells, like these sporophyte cells. So these contain spores inside. Sporophytes here produce the spores. Uh, this is surrounded by tough um, layer, and they contain haploid cells. I don't know if you guys remember haploid and diploid or not, but haplo is half, dipl is double. If you have the whole uh, double set of chromosomes, we call you diploid, 46 in humans. And if you have half of those, like a sperm only or an egg only, the sperm and egg, they contain only half, haploid, haplo. So the spores contain haploid cells. Uh, most of the plants doesn't have that, but bryophytes, they actually uh, they contain the haploid gametophytes. This is dominant. And if you look at the life cycle here, you will see, uh, like from here, if you start with how they form the spores, they start meiosis. I think you guys should know by now what's meiosis and mitosis. So the spores are formed by meiosis. Simply just to remind you, meiosis, mitosis. What's the difference? Meiosis, myos. Myos means reduction. So reduction means you have this set of chromosomes and you split it into two halves. So this is half and this is half, like egg and sperm. This is meiosis, reduction. A full set become halves. Okay, meiosis. Mitosis is coming from mitos. Mitos means threads. So here is one cell. You duplicate first, you make a double, and then there are threads that move them away and they start to move away. But this is whole one and this is whole one. So one give you one and one, mitosis. One give you half and half, meiosis. So meiosis giving you halves, haploid, which is the spores, and the spores they germinated, and then they will start to do some mitosis to increase their number, which is called gametocytes. Another mitosis to make the gametes, and the gametes will be in the form of sperms and eggs. Both are haploid. They need each other to make a complete set. And then when fertilization occur, which is the sperms with the eggs, they are going to form a zygote, very similar to humans. And the zygote obviously is diploid because this is half and this is half in the sperm, half in the egg. They come together, they become a diploid, a whole set. And then they start to do mitosis to become bigger and bigger until they produce the spore capsule containing producing spores later on by meiosis and then mitosis, and so on. This is the whole cycle. Um, so if we discuss a little bit more about the plants, um, the vascular system. What's the vascular system? Vascular means vessels. In human, when you say vessels, mean arteries and veins. Arteries take the blood from the heart to the other parts of the body. Veins take the blood from other parts of the body back to the heart. Here it's kind of similar. You have two vessels, two types of vessels. Instead of artery and vein, you have the phloem and the xylem. Um, so together, one is going up and one is going down. If you like do dissection, and they do that in School of Science. They get these leaves and they cut it and look under the microscope, and this is what you're going to see inside. You will see the phloem and the xylem. One of them is going up, and the other one would be going down if you dissect it and look at it. So this is the phloem, which is going down. You already made the sugar here by photosynthesis, and you're going to move it down to the rest of the plants until it go to the uh, going down until you go to the roots and getting the sugar all over, and you're going to store the extras down here in this type of plants. In other type of plants, you store the sugar in the form of fruits or vegetables or something, and some of them you store it in the roots, like potatoes and carrots. Those two, they store their sugar in the roots, and this is what we get it and eat it. But anyway, what I want you to know here is the phloem is what takes the sugar from the leaves going down. So we do photosynthesis in the leaves by carbon dioxide, go to the leaves, sunlight, energy, the leaves take it. The xylem will take the water and minerals up. So when everything goes up, you make sugar, the phloem will move it down. So remember, flowing going down, xylem going up. So here is the xylem. These are the roots. The roots take water and take minerals, and then it has to move up to the leaves and to the rest of the plants or the tree in order to make photosynthesis until you end up making sugar and store it and send part of it down. And then you get the water, you get the minerals, the xylem take it up to go to share or to participate in the photosynthesis. With photosynthesis, carbon dioxide from the leaves plus water and minerals from the roots, and then you make sugar, moves down in the phloem, and the water and minerals move up in the xylem, and so on. This is the vascular system. And if you look here, if you actually look under the microscope, you will see, if you look closer in the leaves, you will see the leaf stomata. Stoma means mouth. You will see this, something looks like a mouth like this. And this is where carbon dioxide gets in. And then with water you make with oxygen you make water and so on, but this opening will allow carbon dioxide to move in. If you're wondering how that does that happen, they open during daytime to get carbon dioxide in and get rid of oxygen, which is good for us, we're using their oxygen, but for them the oxygen is a waste product. They don't need the oxygen, they need the carbon dioxide. But they take in carbon dioxide and they take out oxygen, plus some water, but this is not our issue. Our issue is they get in carbon dioxide to mix it with water and minerals, to use it and make sugar and other things, and get rid of water. And this is during the day, and we take that. Actually, without plants, the atmosphere will be deficient of oxygen. We don't have enough oxygen. If you wipe off all the plants on Earth, we cannot survive. We will die because they take our carbon dioxide, which is our waste product. They use it to build their sugar and other nutrients, and they actually get rid of their waste product, which is oxygen. For us, we need oxygen. Our waste product is carbon dioxide. So it's exactly the opposite, which is good for us. But during nighttime, the plants do not produce any, and actually the stomata or their mouth close, so there is no more oxygen coming out of it. Um, and the next part is about the ferns and about the angiosperm. We will discuss that.